2. All right, you are listening to WSLR 96.5 FM in Sarasota and WBPV LP 100.1 FM in Bradenton. The views and comments that you hear are by those of the host and guests and do not necessarily expect those of WSLR, its staff, or volunteers, or board of directors for that matter. We want to get into some good, interesting conversation, and that is why this is Talk of the Town.
Thank you all for being here. The shooting deaths of 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis by federal agents has stirred alarm, fear, and protests of immigration and customs enforcement efforts there and elsewhere. Florida, where there is increased cooperation between local law enforcement and federal immigration authorities, is among the top 3 states in the nation for arrests and deportations. How are ICE operations being conducted here and in other cities like Orlando? What is the process for someone who's detained? How many of those arrested have criminal records? And what is being done to provide safety and support to longtime law-abiding residents who fear deportation? All that and more on today's Talk of the Town. Good morning and happy Valentine's Day to everyone. I'm your host, Carrie Seidman, and we're coming to you live from the Fogartyville Community Media and Arts Center. And I'd like to welcome everyone in the full house we have today, as well as those listening on the radio and watching as we stream live on Facebook. And before we dive in, I just wanted to take a moment to say a few words about today's program. It goes without saying that the topic of ICE enforcement and deportation has been a very volatile issue in our country lately. And though Florida is a very different landscape than Minneapolis, we wanted to create an opportunity for everyone to hear from multiple perspectives how ICE is operating here in Florida and to challenge misrepresentations and misconceptions. I want first to give a big round of thanks to my 3 guests who could easily have sidestepped coming here today, but who instead agreed to be with us. Please help me thank them. And whether you like what you hear from them or not, I ask that you please give them your attention and react respectfully. Meanwhile, remember this day is supposed to be all about love, and so conduct yourself accordingly. First, I'd like to welcome our guests. Sarasota County Sheriff Kurt Hoffman has served the community for more than 35 years as an assistant state attorney for the 12th Judicial Circuit, a deputy for the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office, and as a general counsel for the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office since 2005. He was elected sheriff in 2020, succeeding former Sheriff Tom Knight, and he and his wife Terry, whose birthday happens to be tomorrow. It's nice of her to allow her husband to be with us. They live in Venice, and we thank you so much for being here, Sheriff Hoffman. I'm also grateful to have with us Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings. Mayor Demings became Orlando's first African-American police chief in 1998 and was elected as the first African-American sheriff in Orange County in 2008, serving 2 more consecutive terms. In 2018, he was elected mayor, and last November, he formally declared his candidacy for governor of the state of Florida in 2026. Jerry is married to former U.S. Representative and former gubernatorial candidate Val Demings, who's somewhere out in our audience. I truly appreciate you making the long drive to be with us today, Mayor Demings.
I'm honored to be here, and we have twin sons, and their birthday is today. Valentine's Day has cost me a lot of money over these years, so love you, sweetheart.
Well, happy birthday to all. Our third guest is Daniela Arcadia, co-director of El Pueblo Unido Tampa Bay, a grassroots organization founded in 2025 to serve as a voice for communities whose human rights are under attack. As a community activist from Sarasota, Daniela works with other organizers, organizations, and churches to host weekly vigils, coordinate aid to families directly impacted by ICE operations, and help them access critical resources during times of crisis. Welcome, Daniela, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank
So Florida has been called the most ICE-friendly state in the nation. All 67 Florida sheriffs have signed what's known as a 287G agreement with the Department of Homeland Security, which allows their staff to identify, detain, and process undocumented immigrants. Early last year, the state also launched Operation Tidal Wave, which allows state agencies like the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the Florida Highway Patrol to arrest and detain undocumented individuals as well. But I'd like to get a start this morning by getting a feel for how ICE efforts are being carried out both locally and around the state. So can I start with you, Sheriff Hoffman, and maybe you can just tell us how your department conducts its operations, how you collaborate with ICE, and maybe provide a few examples.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Carrie. I appreciate the opportunity. So the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office has had an agreement under the 287G program, which is the subsection of federal statute, since 2018. Now, there's a lot of language in 287, but really it's two different models. One is called the WSO model, which stands for Warrant Service Officer model. So when somebody is arrested and comes into the jail, if they have an ICE detainer, then our corrections deputies are allowed under federal law to serve that ICE detainer on them and hold them for 48 hours until ICE can pick them up. So that's 287G in the jail. The 287G task force model, which is very recent, allows us to go out and do field operations. So if you stop someone for speeding or you make an arrest of somebody and they have they're undocumented or they're a criminal illegal alien, then we can bring them to our jail, and then our WSO officers in the jail serve the warrants. So just by way of example, I looked at the statistics for 2025. The last quarter of 2025, we made 215 referrals to ICE for criminal illegal aliens that were brought into our jail facility for a variety of everything from homicide to shoplifting. And it's worked out very well. We've not, to your point, I want to make sure I answer that. We've not had any issues that some of the other states and jurisdictions have had. We try to make sure that we're facilitating an orderly transfer of that individual from our jail. A lot of times, some of these other jurisdictions that are not doing that, then you get a lot of what you see in Minnesota, for example, where there's street activity or they're knocking on businesses or the relatives' addresses and things like that. We don't do that. Generally speaking, those folks that have a detainer will be picked up within that 48-hour period at our jail.
And they're picked up by ICE officials. Is there an ICE presence in Sarasota County other than your deputized officers?
Yes, we currently have 2 ICE agents that are staffing our jail. They're there basically 8-hour days during the week. And they assist us with determining the status of individuals, helping us with the paperwork, making sure that the detainer warrant is proper before our corrections deputies serve it. They work primarily in the jail, but they have the ability to go out and do field operations as well. They haven't done very much of that. Hasn't been a need when most of them are coming out of our jail.
And just for clarity's sake, the people that you are picking up and detaining are being picked up in the normal process of your duties? There are no targeted raids or anything of that sort?
No, and that's a question I get asked a lot when I'm out, Home Depots, construction sites, that kind of thing. The task force officer model, of which I took the training myself. I believe I'm the only sheriff in the state that has task force authority. I did that to make sure that training was constitutional and it was thorough, and it was. But occasionally we do run into somebody for a non-criminal violation, and it's determined that they're here illegally, and that is the process by which we would contact the ICE agents in the jail. They would verify that and put a detainer on those individuals. As I said, for the last quarter of 2025, we had 215 arrests. Those were criminal arrests.
When you say criminal arrests, they have criminal records or?
Yeah, I just took some examples. So we, in that 4-month period, we had 37 DUI arrests. We had home invasion robbery, cocaine trafficking, capital sexual assault on a person under the age of 12, murder, failure to register as a career offender, which means you've had several felony convictions, sexual assault, domestic battery by strangulation, hit and run, serious bodily injury, aggravated stalking, lewd and lascivious molestation of a 12-year-old, traveling for the purposes to lure a minor, and it goes on and on. Some of that, it's basically everything, as I mentioned, from shoplifting to murder.
Okay. I'm going to come back to that because I do have a couple examples I want to ask you about of people who have been detained and sent to detention camps who were stopped primarily for traffic violations.
Sure,
But I
happens.
want to turn to Mayor Demings for a moment and see if he can give us a little bit of the lay of the land of what's happening in Orlando. I know that I read that you had signed the 287G agreement under duress. So maybe you could explain what you mean by that and what you're seeing on the ground there.
Okay, thank you very much. First, I did spend about 37 and a half years in law enforcement before I transitioned to being the mayor. Here in the state of Florida, we have a situation in which our state has passed a law that says that any of our local government officials must use their best efforts to cooperate with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. In Orange County, we had a situation that developed in which, as the new Trump administration in January of last year began to work across the country with law enforcement agencies, including local law enforcement, it came into our community in which the sheriffs, through agreement with the governor and others, created a program in which, in a short period of time, the local jurisdictions were asked to sign an agreement, and we asked a lot of questions about it. Prior to signing the agreement, I had some concerns. We were questioning what it really meant to sign the agreement. And while we were going through that process, the Attorney General for Florida and the governor threatened that if we did not sign the agreement, that myself and my entire board, I'm a countywide elected mayor, one of only 3 in Florida, that represents a strong government, a form of mayoral government. And then there's 6 commissioners. They said if we fail to sign it, then we will be subjected to removal from office. Now, mind you that for perhaps 2 decades, we had an agreement with the U.S. Marshal Service in our county to house federal inmates, including ICE detainees. And that had largely gone on very well. During a portion of the time, I had been the sheriff. We did not proactively go out and do Immigration and Customs Enforcement because I thought, and still do believe, that that's a federal responsibility. However, in the state of Florida, the governor believes that we all should support that. So as we were discussing the agreement, the signing of the agreement, there was a press conference in which the Attorney General clearly indicated that our failure to sign would result in our removal from office. We had an intergovernmental service agreement, an IGSA agreement that had been in place since, I think, around 2011. In that agreement, it was an agreement between Orange County government, and the U.S. Marshal Service. The law also requires that every local government has to have some form of agreement to house the federal ICE detainees within their correctional facilities. As we were looking at the language and negotiating and discussing with the federal authorities is when the noise came from the governor and the attorney general. I looked at it, and through negotiations with the U.S. Marshal Service, we determined in consultation with my legal advisors that it really didn't require, the agreement didn't require us to do exactly what the governor and the attorney general was saying. And as a result of the negotiations with the Marshal Service, I signed the agreement, yes, somewhat under duress, because I did not want to risk the removal of myself and all 6 of our commissioners from office, because then that would give the governor the opportunity to insert whoever he wanted in our role. In our county, the governor had removed our state attorney, who represents 2 counties, Monique Worrell. She was removed from office by the governor, and it took her a full year before she really got back into office.
Okay.
And the only way she got back into office was because she had to run for re-election, and she won her re-election.
Okay, I don't want to get sidetracked too much, so I just want, if you could, what has happened since you did sign that agreement?
Okay.
What does immigration enforcement look like in Orlando right now?
So, first off, local law enforcement officers are supporting the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. From a county perspective, our county correctional officers are not involved in field enforcement. That is pretty much being done by ICE agents and in some rare cases, local law enforcement officers in support of that. And it is pretty robust activity. The bookings into our jail skyrocketed, and as of January of this year, we saw something happening within the jail in which there were repeat bookings of the same person, because the immigration and customs officials ran out of capacity within all of their detention facilities. We were holding, pursuant to our IGSA agreement, these individuals for up to 72 hours. And then they were transporting them somewhere else. But then they started bringing them back because they weren't being deported. And so that backed up our jail. Our jail population began to spike. And by the way, our agreement, they reimburse us about $88 a day, but we had renegotiated a fee that we believe was fair at $180 a day, and they still only reimbursing us $88 a day. So it creates a negative impact on our jail operations and staff, and so I think that that is unfair to us because our taxpayers are paying the gap for the federal immigration and customs enforcement.
I want to circle back to that with the issue of the numbers that you've seen cycling through your jail, but I want to give Daniela a chance to chime in here from an alternate perspective. And when we say what's happening on the ground, Daniela, what's happening to the families that you're assisting? What are you seeing?
Families are being torn apart. No, we don't see what's going on in Minnesota here because the sheriffs and the police department are handing them over. And only about less than 14% are actually, violent criminal charges. Everyone else is driving without a license. And these parents have to drive. Like, they have to drive to work. They have to drive to school. And that's why I'm here today, for those families who are being torn apart, who are being put under hardship because of the sheriff's department just handing them over to ICE without, really being honest about it. That's how I feel. They give us the numbers of all the violent ones, But what about those who were not violent crimes? What about those who were only driving to church? That's what we're seeing. So we're seeing mothers who are left behind with the kids, mothers who were stay-at-home moms raising their children, and now they have to go out and work. Sometimes they have to take their kids with them to work if they're allowed to be able to provide not only a lawyer to try to get the dad out. And when I'm not here to defend criminals, okay? If I was, I think this would be a different show talking about something else. But I'm here for those who are not criminals, who are now being under so much stress. And these moms, they need help. That's what we're seeing. They need food, they need help with gas, they need help paying their bills. That's what we're seeing.
What about the fear factor that you're seeing? What are they
We see
telling
the
you?
fear in kids. I see a lot because I work with children, and I see the fear in the kids. Parents are being forced to talk to their children about things that they didn't have to talk to them about before. There's trauma because sometimes if family is driving to the grocery store and they get pulled over, now the kids know that dad or mom, whoever's driving, will most likely be arrested. And they know because now the families have to tell them, okay, what's gonna happen after. So the amount of trauma that they're putting these kids under, it's terrible.
Sheriff Hoffman, how do you respond to Daniela's pointing out that some of the people who are being picked up and detained and even deported are people who've had very minor offenses? I know WSLR did a series of stories on a young woman who was stopped on a traffic violation in Northport. She made an illegal U-turn. She was picked up. She was found not to have a valid license. She was taken to jail, and she was eventually sent to a detention center in Texas, where she was denied bail as a threat to the community and ultimately ended up self-deporting.
Yeah, so I'm happy to speak to that. First and foremost, we let 10 million folks come across our southern border, 3 million gotaways, 67,000 Chinese nationals. How many women and children have been trafficked? The problem that we're dealing with now on a financial level and on a personal level is because we opened up that southern border. And if you came here illegally and didn't commit a criminal act, that's still a violation of our laws. If you commit a criminal act, Carrie, if you leave here today on a suspended driver's license, you're most likely going to go to jail. Now, there's a secondary cause and effect here. If you have a detainer that's been issued for you because you've missed a court date under the immigration system, or you came here illegally, then those are the consequences of coming here illegally. I mean, I was...
The woman who I was referring to, just to clarify, was a dreamer, a DACA, a Deferred Action for Childhood.
I'm familiar with DACA. You can add all those terms to it if you want, but those folks who came here illegally, there are consequences.
Well, she came as a child with her
Right.
parents.
And DACA has a program for children of a opportunity for them to get to stay here and to re-up. So, and we also have U visas as well, which our agency handles for victims of crime. But make no mistake about it, my job is enforcement of the law. And a lot of these folks have, the majority of these folks, sometimes I've got one individual in here who killed somebody in another state that came here illegally 5 times. Now, it's easy to have the conversation about, an isolated case here or there, but I'm the one that has to knock on the door and tell the parents that your child was killed by a drunk driver, your child was raped by somebody that wasn't supposed to be here, you were defrauded, in one case out of $60,000, an elderly lady, of all of her savings. So to me, this is part and parcel to my constitutional duty to protect this community. And again, we're starting with the premise that the first thing that you did in the United States of America was break the law. And, that's personally, having been down to the El Paso border with the DEA and witnessed what was going on down there, if you have any empathy at all for the human condition, what the previous administration did by allowing 10 million people to come into this country, bypass all the people who are already in line, who have an opportunity to do it the right way.
This is
a situation that we're trying to fix now, Carrie. This is not something that we wanted either, but there's 10 million people
Right,
that
but
came.
I think what makes it difficult for many of us is that this is impacting people who, like this dreamer who was brought by her parents as a child. She didn't have any choice in it. She's law-abiding. She's a student. She's trying to improve herself. I think that's what makes it difficult for many people to understand, is that you have a very hard and fast line on what is criminal and what isn't criminal, and I think there's probably no one in the House who thinks that violent criminals who came illegally shouldn't be deported. But I think that hard and fast line for everyone is what makes this such a challenging topic for all
Carrie,
of us.
what do you say to all the people who are in line? What do you say to all the people who are in line trying, like my daughter-in-law, who's from Japan, waited 3 years. My secretary waited 8 years. All of those folks are going to go to the back of the line because we're dealing with 10 million folks, 3 million gotaways, and all of these problems based on the policy of the previous administration.
Well, I think we've been in need of immigration reform for a long time,
Right.
and unfortunately, that didn't happen, and so it's coming back to punish the people who are here diligently trying to become legal residents and have been backlogged or have not been able to complete that process. But I want to turn back to Mayor Demings for a moment. We were talking about the number of the explosion of people in your jail population. I know there's also been talk of opening a new detention center in your county. Can you tell us where that stands, and is that what needs to happen to deal with this, the number of people coming through your system?
I'm happy to do that. Let me just start by saying that.
Yeah, you're also welcome to respond to anything any of the other panelists are saying.
Let me just start by saying that I think that the challenge and the problem that many Americans feel right now, it's an emotional experience that we're going through, is because of the way in which our federal authorities, and in some instances our local authorities, are going about enforcing the law. It has a feel and a look sometimes that looks pretty cruel and looks excessive. And that is what is moving Americans to say, wait a minute now, something's not right here. But I absolutely believe that we ought to enforce the laws of our country. Enforcing immigration laws is important, but how we go about doing that is really the conversation that we're having now. I say that because we have airports, we have seaports. Local authorities are working in all of those places to support that. Our air passenger travel, and if we're traveling on cruise ships, we become less safe if we don't do enforcement. I've seen when there's a breakdown in our country where we fail to adequately enforce our immigration laws, because I've been around long enough. I was chief of police when the events of 9/11 happened. And the casualties associated with that had somewhat to do with the lack of enforcement of our borders. I was sheriff when we had the Pulse nightclub attack, and we had an individual come in. So in order to protect all of us, we do have to enforce the laws. But where I believe that we're out of balance is the force that is being used to enforce those laws now. I taught de-escalation and training to law enforcement officers. I hired law enforcement officers. I supervised them. I managed them. I held them accountable when they used excessive force. I could not condone that type of behavior. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now, in some regards, we are seeing a failure of leadership because the enforcement tactics are excessive and they're not de-escalated. And that is something that most good law enforcement officers and leaders do not condone in this country. So yes, there are some challenges that we have, and I will tell you that we have to fix it. We have to fix what it looks like. We have to fix what it looks like for these families to make certain that how we're responding in a humane way as opposed to an inhumane way.
Exactly.
And that's where I think the divide is within our country, regardless of your political affiliation. Most people want other people to be treated with dignity and respect. They want them to be treated like they're human beings, and that's the issue that really creates a complexity. Because of that now, no one wants ICE to be in their communities. Not in mine. No one wants to see happening in their communities what they saw happening in Minnesota. We don't want to see that as a nation because it leaves you feeling afraid. We have, yes, in our state, as I've been traveling the state since I've been on this campaign trail, people come up to me and they're afraid. They're afraid for their families. They're afraid for others. They're afraid just because of what they look like. They may be assumed to be here unlawfully. Those stories are real for Floridians and American families that is happening, and that means that our country has to fix that, okay? For people of color who sometimes have been disproportionately impacted by the laws that we have or the failure of enforcement of laws that we have. That's where this rub is coming now. So I just believe that we have to make some adjustments in how we're going about doing it.
I have a question on that. If you win, would you end 287G?
I don't know that I would end 287G because, as I said, that failure to, I've sworn to 7 oaths that I will support, protect, and defend the Constitution and government of the United States and the state of Florida against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And then it goes on based upon whatever office I've held. I believe in enforcement. So I don't think that we can ever say that we won't enforce our immigration laws. But if I'm elected governor, what I will ensure is that we hold accountable those who are doing the enforcement to make certain that it is consistent with the law, it's consistent with civil rights of persons. I will stand up for that and not tolerate men and women who wear a badge, hiding behind the badge, saying that they can treat people any kind of way. I'm not going to stand up for that.
Okay. Now, I want to mention that, I've lived here for almost over 25 years now, actually. I forget that I'm getting older. But, I've seen it. People get pulled over, or years before this administration at least, they get pulled over, they get arrested, or sometimes they didn't get arrested. And I'm talking just for driving without a license. They pay their fine, which is bringing money in, right? They go to court, they know they shouldn't be driving, here's my $500-$600, pay your fines, and you're good. Because all you did was drive without a license. Why? Because Sarasota, Florida won't give you a license if you're undocumented. Other states do. Why can't we do that here? Make them study for the test, make sure they're safe drivers, and let them drive lawfully, okay? Because for all those years also, they have been able to buy cars, register those cars, put insurance on those cars. Because when they tell you that these undocumented immigrants are driving without insurance, that's a lie. Are there some that are, yes, maybe, bad on them, but they have been able to register, insure, and buy those cars. Why not be able to drive them? How does that make sense? It doesn't make sense. And this is hurting the economy because I know people who work in insurance and they're already seeing that people are not able to insure their cars anymore, they're leaving. It's affecting them that way too. It's affecting dealerships too who are not able to sell cars anymore because why would you buy a car if you know you're gonna get in trouble and probably deported just for driving it? So I think if we could go back to that at least, hey, you got caught driving without a license because we won't give you a license. Here, pay your fine. Go home.
I wonder, and maybe you can answer this, Sheriff Hoffman, if there's any information about the demographics of the people who are being detained and deported. There's a lot of concern about racial profiling, about picking up people who only speak Spanish, and so forth. Is there information the public can access as to who these people are demographically?
Yes, so FDLE's online database will show what countries they come from. At last count, I think we had 46 total countries. But, to the mayor's point, I just want to make crystal clear. I was a constitutional law professor at the college level. The reason I took the class, the task force class, is to see what that training was about. We have a bias-based profiling policy in our agency. There's actually a state statute. You've got to report that every year. I'm proud to say that with 500,000 citizens, 2.5 million visitors, that we had 3 complaints of excessive force last year when you're dealing with millions and millions of people. So I think, our culture is right, and that's one of the reasons you don't see what's going on in Minnesota and Portland and New York and other places like that. But clearly, of the 10 million folks that came over illegally, about 8 million of those are from Central American countries, Mexico, so that the majority of those folks are from our southern border. We obviously have folks from all over the United States, all over the world, actually, that are coming here illegally, but predominantly the southern border is the one that was open. That's where the most folks came over. That's where the most undocumented children came through. Some estimate at 300,000. 3 million known, gotaways, and you say, how do you know it's 3 million if they're gotaways? And my trip down to El Paso, the sophistication of the camera system and the ability for AI to generate how many people are sourcing, across the border every single day, I think that's a pretty accurate estimate. As to the driver's license issue, I guess the issue with me is you made your way here illegally. And now you've committed another crime by driving without a driver's license. If I look at the list I have for the last quarter of 2025, there's probably a couple dozen traffic violations on there. But I read off some of these charges, and frankly, there are some significantly bad actors in our community. And as the mayor mentioned, I also took that same oath to the Florida Constitution and to the U.S. Constitution to protect this community. And I've knocked on too many doors and told people that their loved one has died or been maimed or raped or hurt. And I'm not going to be part and parcel to allowing, that kind of criminal behavior.
Yeah, no, as I said, I think there you couldn't find someone here who wouldn't agree that we don't need violent criminals, in our community who are here illegally. Let's turn to, right now the government is in a partial shutdown because Democrats have objected to continuing funding for the Department of Homeland Security without some reforms in how ICE operations are being conducted. This is a result of what happened in Minnesota. So I know some of the things that have been mentioned include, having ICE officials have identification and not wear masks, wear body cameras. Can I just ask any of you to weigh in on anything that you think might help defray the tension at this point?
Can I take 5 seconds, Mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, again, we've made hundreds and hundreds of arrests. We've had one individual who was a peeping Tom peeping into a school teacher's window and fled and got tased before he was taken to the jail. We've not had one single incident of anybody being injured, harmed, and dare I say, have any of their constitutional rights violated. I'm monitoring these on a quarterly basis and sometimes down on a monthly basis.
I just want to make clear, I wasn't making any accusation that was happening. What I'm more speaking to is the fear factor.
Sure. But I want to make sure that my constituents that are out here know that that is not occurring. We are complying with the ICE detainers, but people are not having their civil rights infringed upon by any estimation that I can make.
So what I would say is that when you look at it from a law enforcement perspective, the calamities that we're seeing are really mostly at the federal level. Our state and local law enforcement officers are not out wearing masks They're not out doing what you're seeing because of the great work that our sheriffs and police chiefs and others are doing at the local level. The primary responsibility for enforcement of federal law are federal officials. And unfortunately, because they had to ramp up so quickly, I don't believe that the personnel that have been deployed were adequately trained. And when, as a former sheriff and police chief, a former street cop, it was unallowed for us to, unless we were really working some kind of deep undercover assignment, to have our face covered. We had to have our badge shown, our name shown, and everything. And that's about accountability for your actions, so that you cannot hide behind the veil of your enforcement authority and then treating people and violating their law, the rights, even though there are laws on the book that prohibit that from happening. But for whatever reason, at the highest level of our country, they've condoned this behavior. And if you are not violating people's rights, then you should have no problem with your face being seen, operating in the full sunlight, daylight of what is going on. And so that's kind of what is happening. The sheriff, I'm sure he doesn't have his personnel out doing that. Okay, the sheriffs and the police chiefs that I know, they're not doing that. You have not seen that to any great extent. And if that was happening at the local level, then those employees of the sheriff or the police department should be held accountable if they are violating the department policies. Our law enforcement officers, for the most part, are wearing body-worn cameras. I was one of the first sheriffs to deploy body-worn cameras on my personnel because I wanted accountability for them. That was my responsibility, to hold them accountable for enforcing the laws. That was great pushback, for whatever reason, from our federal authorities to not do that. Now they're making some adjustments, I believe, but that has come after some people perhaps died needlessly because there was a lack of accountability and supervision and oversight in the field. And listen, if I had a police officer that I would say was a renegade officer, I fired that officer, okay, if they weren't following the laws.
Okay, so that's not really happening in Florida, certainly not in the way it was happening in Minnesota.
Think so.
But Daniela, maybe...
But we don't want it to happen in Florida
course.
either. And that's what people are concerned about. They don't want to see that happening either. We don't want to see our communities ripped apart by division over issues that may not be the most important. We all have the responsibility to make sure that our communities are safe for everyone.
And maybe, Daniela, I don't know if you can weigh in on this, because I know that you help families. I don't know how far along the deportation process you follow them. But what are you seeing in terms of people who have been detained, their rights being honored, their legal rights being honored?
So one of the things that I heard you say in an interview is that when they are moved to Big Cypress, the detention center, I refuse to mention the name that they choose to call it, you said they're only there for 6 to 7 days. There's a reading room. They provide their medications. They eat okay food. That's not what we're hearing. We have people who travel every Sunday. There's a vigil that goes on there. They're out there at 4 o'clock every Sunday, and we hear stories from families whose family has been there for 2 months. I think that's the longest I've heard. He was there for 2 months. Yes, they'll give you Tylenol for a headache, but if you're diabetic, if you are waiting for a transplant, you're in dialysis, like you're not getting any of that. So that's one of the things, and we have a family right now who is terrified because their family member gets dialysis 3 times a week, and if they are detained, they're not gonna get that. So they know that that father's gonna die, right? So that's where the fear comes from. And no, the community does not want to see that here, and we see it because of the support that we're getting. Like they got to see Preddy and Good murdered, and they acted here. They're getting involved. They're asking, what do I do? What do you need? They're donating money. They're donating food. They're helping. We're not seeing it here, and they're already angry. So, and I think that's good. You're going to see that during election time. You're going to see that anger. And I hope that it starts in August with the school board.
And And what are you seeing or hearing in terms of their access to legal representation?
I know if you have the money to pay for a lawyer, you can hire one. They made it really hard for even lawyers to go see them in the Everglades. But if you don't have the money, you're not getting representation. You're pretty much detained there. They'll move you around the country. Sometimes we have family members call us to get help finding their family because they don't even know where they are. And if you don't have the money, you're not gonna find them, at least not easily. You might find them months later when they call you from their country saying, hey, I'm back home. But other than that, if you don't have the money, you're not gonna find them easily. They're not getting a lawyer there to represent them for free.
So, I think also, Carrie, part of what we're seeing is a breakdown of the three equal branches of government, the judicial, the executive, and the legislative branch. And unfortunately, we're seeing, because of a lot of things that have happened, we see one branch kind of dominating the other two right now. So we've got to get to a point where the courts should be intervening in some of these processes. And now we're seeing in the Orlando area, we're seeing federal judges now addressing issues with due process. And they are ordering the release of persons whose due process has been violated. And that's the appropriate place for that kind of conversation to occur. It shouldn't be happening out on the streets because, that's not what the men and women who are deployed to the streets are really trained to do, is to interpret law and sit in judgment. That's the judicial branch. And so what my appeal is to make certain that all the branches are doing what they're supposed to be doing to keep the balance, the check and the balance on the other branches. We've got to get back to that as a country. We got to get back to that as a state. And unfortunately, we're seeing here, at least in the state of Florida, where we're jaded in a direction that I think doesn't create the balance that we want to see. That's why you all are here. That's why many of you are expressing either your support or your lack of support. And I think that's where many Floridians are and many Americans are. We want our government to function like it's supposed to function.
Just real quick, Carrie, to Daniela's point, you're obviously referring to Alligator Alcatraz. When we sent our folks over there to support the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, I picked one of my seasoned supervisors, and I told them, you go to every single place inside that facility and you look. Go in the medical side, go in the legal side, go in the food line, and you report back to me what you're seeing on the ground yourself. He said, Sheriff, we're eating out of the same food line as everybody else. I see board games, I see kids playing, I see access to telephones.
Okay, I'm just going to cut it off mostly for time reasons
okay.
here
But
because
we have a different interpretation
Yeah,
of what's going
that's
on.
what
I
I'm
invite
saying.
you to
There-
go yourself
there-
I'm going to.
on
I'm
a Sunday
going
at
to.
4 o'clock and meet with some of the families
I'm
outside
going
and
to,
listen
Danielle,
to their
but that's what I've
stories.
heard.
I'm sure that there are very different
We have a bus going for
perspectives.
free, by the way.
But this is radio, and I am on a tight time frame here.
You're doing a good job,
And
Carrie.
we have a really...
How about a round for Carrie?
We have a great audience that has supplied me with more questions than we can possibly get to in the 12 minutes that we have left. So I want to turn to those questions, and I'm just going to pose these, and anybody who wants to can dive in, or anyone who's the most appropriate. What policies, well, this one's kind of for the sheriff. What policies are in place to ensure that any ICE enforcement action in our community requires a valid judicial warrant, and how are residents' rights protected if it isn't present?
So when they come into the jail on a criminal charge, if there is a detainer warrant in the system, then we will honor that detainer warrant. I will tell you that Florida, being the third largest state in the union, when all of those warrants were released under the current administration, initially it was 750,000 warrants. It's now 1.3 million warrants. So within days, we were seeing those warrants pop up here in Sarasota County, mostly through the Florida Highway Patrol, but our agency as well. So we honor that, we serve that. ICE has 48 hours to pick that person up. If they don't, then they're released on bond if they can make bond.
I'm gonna direct this one to Daniela, and then Sheriff, you'll probably want to respond. But how have you seen the actions of ICE around the country affect trust in local law enforcement?
Oh, especially on the children, again, who, you know, most of them are U.S. citizens. They were born here. Most of the families that I've met with and helped have lived here for over 20 years. So yes, we need immigration reform. We need to be able to check them and say, you know what, you deserve to be here, and give them permission to do that. But I mostly see it in the children. I know that there are a lot of them who, if they are witnessing a crime or something's going on at home, they're not gonna call you, and that's not protecting the community.
Does that concern you at all, Sheriff Hoffman, that people are going to be more fearful of reporting crimes or even asking for help?
Right. So as it relates to reporting crimes, there is a U visa process to be able to do that. Our office has been very robust in processing those U visas back when I was the general counsel, and we're currently doing that. I think we have 25 of those applications that have come through our office. But you have to understand, our job is to enforce the law, and there are consequences. If you get arrested for a DUI, or you get arrested for committing a burglary and your children are with you, you're going to be separated from your children. And this is no different in that if there's criminality involved and a warrant is served on you and you're picked up, then there's going to be consequences of that. If you think for a moment, we could be handling all of these DACA and Dreamers if we weren't dealing with 10 million folks that weren't vetted when they came across primarily the southern border.
Well, we'd all
So it
like
does
to
take resources. It does take resources to deal with this instead of some of the things that Daniela's referencing.
Yeah, I think we'd all like to turn back the clock and put immigration reform into place long before anything has been done. But I want to move on to the next question. This more addresses the financial aspects. First of all, I had a question and I forgot to ask about whether there are individual incentives to either individual deputies or to the department from the feds or from the state for bringing in people. Do you have quotas?
We do not have quotas. When we encounter folks and they meet the criteria or they have a detainer, then we're going to bring them in. And yes, the federal government and the state government has reimbursed us. I think we recently just got reimbursed for $283,000. I know that that Homeland Security provided a van for us to help with transport. What I'm trying to do is make it fiscally neutral to this community, but also be able to enforce the law. And so far, they've done a pretty good job of reimbursement.
Not so much the case for my county, and not so much the case for the state of Florida. Last I saw, the federal government owes the state of Florida $573 million for support of immigration and custom efforts. That's at the expense of Florida taxpayers. That's not right. I believe that, again, this is primarily a federal responsibility. Floridians shouldn't be on the hook to that amount. In my county, I've said to you, we have a written agreement, and we hadn't looked at the average daily per diem that they were supposed to be reimbursing us for holding their inmates in our local jail. They now owe us several $100,000 that we've been in negotiations with, and so my taxpayers in Orange County are on the hook because we've been mandated by the state to cooperate under the threat of being removed from office as a local elected official. But again, I think that we're due that money back, to $300,000 or so dollars that we have a gap in my county alone. But again, Floridians, you, the residents of the state, owed $573 million from the federal government.
And while they
Okay.
owe you money, undocumented immigrants pay $1.8 billion in taxes, undocumented, because yes, they can pay taxes, and they do, because they don't want to get in trouble, so they do everything they can. They pay $1.8 billion in taxes just last year. Now they're scared to do their taxes, I'll tell you that. But last year, that's how much they paid in, while the federal government owes you.
I have another quick financial question. When an immigrant is arrested and posts bail, then deports, what happens to that money?
So that money goes back to the bail bondsman, or that's a contractual agreement with the bail bondsman. The judge sets the bail, you contact the bail bondsman. Whether they get that back or not is between them and the bail bondsman. The sheriff's office collects it on behalf of a certified bail bond company, but we have no interaction with the
But
funds after
if
that.
you're undocumented and you paid for your family member to get out and they don't get their money back. An undocumented person doesn't get it back.
Well, that's between the bail bond company, not the sheriff's office.
This one is directed to you, Sheriff Hoffman. Can you speak about rules of engagement that agents are required to follow? And a follow-up question, and I'd like to really hear about this last one. Can you give guidelines to civilians about how they should engage?
Sure. So I guess when they say agents, I don't know if they're assuming that that's federal agents or sheriff's office, so I'll just speak to that. Like I mentioned, we have 2 ICE agents that primarily assist us with the research on the individuals and help us with the detainer warrants. They do come out occasionally. Obviously, I don't think anybody in this room can say that they've heard of any, negative physical consequences, deprivations at the hands of the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office. As the mayor said, I would not tolerate that, and those folks would not work for me. But generally speaking, we have really a variety of ways. As I mentioned, there was initially 750,000 warrants that were put into the system. It's now upwards of about 1.3 million. So if you're stopped for trespassing at somebody's house and we run Carrie's name and it comes back that there is a ICE detainer warrant, then that could, you're going to end up in jail. If you have a trespass case and you're here illegally, or a burglary or robbery or whatever the case may be, the ICE agents will check your status to be here when you get to the jail, and you can be sent to one of the ICE regional detention facilities for that as well. And the second part of your question, Carrie?
Was how would you recommend civilians engage with?
I appreciate that question because and the mayor's touched on it. This is very, very important. And I know this might not be popular, but to me, the politicians in Minnesota have made this worse. There's 1,300, okay, hear me out. There are 1,300 individuals with detainers that they could very easily hand over in a safe, secure environment for the person who's being detained, for the officers, and for the citizens, and they don't. We do that here, and we've not had any problem. So obviously, and I think the mayor touched on it, you don't fight your case on the street. You don't throw a brick through a police officer's window, okay? You don't damage squad cars. You don't get up on top of police officers.
Unfortunately, these are actions that have happened because of instances
But
of
Carrie, the
excessive
question was,
force.
how do you avoid that? You fight your case in court. You take your case to court. You don't fight your case by throwing a brick through the window of a police officer who's trying to make
Okay.
an arrest.
We're almost out of town. We are literally down to the last 2 minutes.
Okay.
I want to give you each one final word, and what I'd like you to ask you to contribute is one thing that could be done right now that would improve the situation in this country on this topic. Daniela?
Immigration reform. Yes. We need it. Yes. Please be active moral agents. Defend your community. Yeah. And no, we hopefully will never have to see what Minnesota and other states are seeing. But if we see that force here, I do hope that we stand up and do what's right.
Mayor Demings.
Well, I think you should know your rights. Remember that people are not in this country tried and convicted on the streets. That means that all 3 branches, again, of government has to work together and not separately.
Excellent. Sheriff?
So if this is a turn back time question, having visited the El Paso border, I
You
wish
got 15 seconds.
all the money that we're spending right now doing this, we should have put facilities along that border where people could be processed more quickly and more thoroughly and get into the country legally. That's where I wish the money would have gone.
I know we could continue this debate forever. That's not how radio works, and we're getting close to the end of our time. I want to thank my panelists for having the integrity to be here today. Please show them your appreciation. Talk of the Town takes place on the second Saturday of each month and always in front of a live audience here at Fogartyville. If you can't be with us or you miss a program, you can always access past shows in the WSLR.org archive by podcast or on WSLR's YouTube channel. We will next be back on March 14th, which is the day after this year's state legislative session is scheduled to end. So I'm sure there will be no shortage of topics to talk about. Thanks to the Gulf Coast Community Foundation for its support of Talk of the Town, to today's panelists, the WSLR staff, donors, and listeners, and thanks to all of you in today's audience and listening elsewhere for making Talk of the Town part of your weekend. Enjoy your Valentine's Day weekend with the ones you love, and until next month, this is your Talk of the Town host, Carrie Seidman, saying, take care of each other and carry on.
Sheriff, good job. You got a tough job.
Love is coming to us all.
Thank you all for coming to Talk of the Town today. We appreciate you for being